Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rabbi Melanie Lavav, and I have the honor of serving as the executive director of Shomer Collective. Shomer Collective is a startup nonprofit founded about 5 years ago by a group of friends who had had the experience of someone close to them dying, and they didn't know what to do or where to turn Jewishly, and they knew that they were missing something big. Shomer Collective's work is to help you talk about and plan for end of life Jewishly. Our work emerges from the reality that too many of us wind up in crisis around end of life because we aren't talking about or planning for the realities of our mortality. We know that Jewish wisdom has a lot to offer in this regard, and our programs are designed to help make Jewish wisdom accessible as we work to transform Jewish communal culture around death and dying. The word shomer in Hebrew means guard and is the person or people who take turns sitting with the deceased from the time of death through burial, often members of the Sacred Burial Society, the Chevra Kadisha, who also perform the ritual washing and the dressing of the body. Just as the shomer provides sacred accompaniment to the deceased, so too is our work designed to provide sacred accompaniment in the form of Jewish wisdom to support you in talking about and planning for end of life. The reality in this country is that the majority of us might agree that it's a good idea to have these conversations, to talk about our wishes for end of life, yet only a minority have actually done so. Our work aims to change that. If you need help with the task of advanced care planning, of figuring out who your healthcare proxy is going to be and clarifying your healthcare wishes, join us for our next What Matters program. This work of planning for end of life, we see it in three levels. First, preparation. How do we prepare for the reality of mortality? Second, transition. How do we support the time between life and death? And third, how do we grieve? Today's program is the first in a three-part series we're doing this winter on medical aid in dying, starting with one Jewish family story today. Next month, we'll be talking with Rabbi Shlomo Brody of the organization MAiD about traditional Jewish law views on this topic. And in March, I will be leading a community conversation, holding space here for the questions and teaching Jewish ideas about the tension between personal liberties and communal responsibilities. As you know, this option, medical aid in dying, is becoming more widely available in the United States, with a growing number of states legalizing it each year. And for our Canadian friends joining us, we know it's been legal there since 2016. How might we understand all of this in light of Jewish ideas? And now I just want to offer a brief teaching from Jewish wisdom to ground us in our conversation today. Two ideas. First, Torah wisdom. In the book of Deuteronomy, and I have the quote up on the screen, chapter 30, verse 19, we see the commandment, Uvacharta b'chaim, choose life. Uvacharta b'chaim leman tichyeh ata, choose life so that you shall live. Jewish wisdom acknowledges the idea of free will. We're given the responsibility of making choices. What does it mean to choose life when living becomes suffering? Hold that question in mind. The second idea I want to share is an idea from the Talmud, the discussions that the rabbis were having in the wake of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the first few centuries of the Common Era, when they were trying to figure out how are we going to live our lives when life as they had known it was no longer possible. And in a tractate called Ketubot 104a, we read the story of Rabbi Yehuda, Judah the prince he's called, suffering from a physical malady. His students surround his home praying for him to live. And his maidservant, the woman who is attending to him in his home, sees how often Rabbi Yehuda has to take off his tefillin to go to the bathroom repeatedly, as in his day, tefillin were worn throughout the day, and we don't wear them when we go to the bathroom. She saw that he was suffering from an intestinal malady, and she went up onto his roof, took a jug, and threw it down on the ground, shattering it, causing a loud noise. In that moment of shock, Rabbi Yehuda's students paused as they looked up to see what had happened. And it was in that moment that Rabbi Yehuda's soul ascended to the heavens, the text tells us, that he died. From this source and from others, the rabbis come to permit us to pray for an end of suffering. Literally pray for someone to die if it means their suffering will end. Choosing life, ending suffering, We hold these ideas in mind as we get our conversation started. So we are blessed today to have my teacher, your teacher, the Honorable Ruth Messinger, share with us her family story as she journeyed this past summer to Switzerland with her husband, Andrew Lachman. You see the picture of them together on the screen. May Andrew's memory be for a blessing as Andrew underwent assisted suicide. And a program note, Ruth and Andrew were accompanied in Switzerland by their dear friend, Rabbi Joy Levitt. Joy was scheduled to join us in conversation today. She sends her regrets as she is attending the funeral of her own sister-in-law today.
No,
We send
she's officiating. She's officiating.
officiating at the funeral. Thank you. We send Joy and her family our deepest condolences. May they be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So here's how it's going to go for the next 50 minutes. I'm going to ask Ruth just a few questions. She will share her story in detail. And in the last 20 minutes or so of our time together, we will take questions and I will moderate that. All right, Ruth, let's get started. Tell us, where does this story begin?
I want to set the broad context because many of people who have written in are in the states where medical aid in dying has become legal, and they say correctly that they want to understand it and be able to minister to it. So, medical aid in dying, where it's approved in the states and in Canada, requires doctors to certify that you have a terminal illness and will be dead in 6 months. And then there's a process for people being able to assist you, medical aid in dying, just the way it sounds. The core here that puts a twist in the story is that medical aid in dying is no place available for people whose problem is dementia.
Right.
Canada is fiercely considering that issue and has people who have a couple of people with severe, I think they would be comfortable with my saying, I don't know them, but I read about them with severe psychological challenges and with dementia who are serving as plaintiffs in arguing to Canada that it should expand the law. But right now it is medical aid in dying. I think we're up to 13 states plus Canada, just signed by the governor of the state of New York, I want to say to her credit, against protests. But that is who it's available for. And it's really important, as several people are writing in, that clergy, chaplains, social workers, people be available to help those families because it's a huge decision. And my experience in talking about this is that in almost any family where someone is eligible for medical aid in dying, there are people who think it's the right thing for that person to do and people who think it's the wrong thing for that person to do. So there are family consequences. Okay, that's my context. We might come back to some of that. Where this
Okay.
begins for us is that my extraordinary husband, who had amazing life as a educator, making significant change in schools and school systems. And as those people on the call who know me will verify, the world's most extraordinary partner support person. So he was there for every single thing I did, running for office, serving in office, losing office, running American Jewish World Service, traveling a great deal for global human rights work. And for my current social justice work, he was my significant partner. About 4 years ago, he started complaining about forgetfulness. And I said, everybody forgets things, and older people forget things more often. But he was the person who, after a few months of that, said, no, there's something more serious wrong here. And we went through good, I'm saying good carefully, not great, but good medical help. And for the following reasons. First of all, there basically is no affirmative diagnosis for Alzheimer's, with the possible exception of a spinal tap. And we made the decision that it was not worth getting the official diagnosis to go through a dangerous procedure. So they're still doing testing. I think there's a good research going on. Andrew was a participant at the end of his life in a research study, but the hope is that they'll be able to tell from changes in your blood.
Mhm.
But right now, I would say that the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is itself something of a challenge, and involves psychological testing and probably the opinion of doctors. We had an Alzheimer's doctor. He's the person who saw us through this, and that was very helpful. And we had some consultation with a social worker. And let me interrupt now. I'm sure this isn't a positive issue for Shomer, but let me just say to people, you need your end of life plan. You need to think it through. You need to answer a whole bunch of questions. There's a form that's available through government called MOLST, MOLST.
Medical orders for life-sustaining treatment.
Thank you. And then I will be a big promoter on this program for Dignitas, which is the organization that we worked with in Switzerland. Even if you are not considering their path toward what it's called an accompanied suicide, even if you're not pursuing that path, if you join Dignitas, which is a very small amount of money, that they will send you the similar bunch of questions to what the MOST form does, and they will actually give you a little paper passport, as many copies as you need, which you can carry in your own wallet, which you can give to your loved ones, which says basically what decisions you would like made on your behalf if you're no longer able to make them yourself. Anyway, Andrew had the additional dramatic evidence of what was ahead because his mother, who is still alive, who just turned 99, has had severe dementia for the last probably 10 years. We are fortunate that because of Andrew's late dad, there's enough funding for her to live in her own apartment with regular 24-hour care, but she's basically not there mentally. And so Andrew had a model of what he did not want, how he did not want to end up. We spent time with his mother every week, and he was able to say, my mother didn't want to end up like this, and I don't want to be, that's not where I want to end up. So we have to do something.
Yeah.
So then your question is like, what did we do?
Yes.
It's not easy to do research in this. I think it's getting better. But I will say that the good news is that medical aid in dying is spreading state to state. And the challenge for us was that Andrew kept imagining that that would certainly cover him. And sort of kept suggesting, like, if we move to Oregon, if we set up resident, but
Yes.
I had to keep explaining that although people on the chat are making some nuanced arguments, from our experience, it had not yet passed in New York, but it didn't make a
Right.
difference because it would not cover his circumstance. So we did
Yes.
further research. And from my point of view, and I'll back this up in a minute with another expert, the only resource was Dignitas, an organization based in Switzerland, which its motto is to live with dignity, to die with dignity.
Let me just ask a question of clarification that it wouldn't have applied to Andrew any of the options in the United States, including the 2 states where the residency requirement has been lifted, because no doctor would have, at the time you were making this decision, certified that he was likely to die within 6 months, and that he wouldn't have the capacity to self-administer the medication at that point in time.
Well, we didn't even get to that second point, which is the Dignitas issue, because let me put it differently. Any doctor who decides based on her or his medical oath that they want to help a family or an individual with dementia is running a risk. It doesn't mean I'm not for it, but that would be a legal risk, because it does not cover patients with dementia. And of course, it doesn't cover them correctly, because there's no reason to say that a patient with dementia will die in 6 months. That's not, unfortunately, people with dementia can live forever.
Right.
It does mean that so that I think that's what Canada is coping with. And there are some recent stories, long stories in the New York Times, and it's clear that it's a challenge. I do want to say here, with love and respect to all of us, that there's going to be more and more of the situation, because
Yes.
the good news is there are significant medical advances with most kinds of cancer and heart disease, and there are fewer advances with dementia. So
Yes.
more people are going to live longer, therefore more people are going to experience some kind of psychological, mental challenges, with some with official diagnoses of dementia or Alzheimer's. I want to go back and say our effort to find Dignitas was hugely helped by the book In Love by Amy Bloom.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful book, which I recommend everybody to read just because it's a beautiful book. She's a great writer, but it is odd that consistently through the 4 years that we went through figuring this out and even trying to actually learn what was going to happen to us when we got to Switzerland, her personal narrative, memoir of the loss of her husband was the best resource by far. I don't
Yes.
have a way of getting in touch with her, but if anybody on the call does, I'd love for her to know that there must be many people like us who use her personal narrative as a Bible for this process because she described it at both what it was like living with somebody with Alzheimer's and making the decision, but she then described what it was like for them to go to Switzerland. And we used that as a great resource because as good
Mhm.
as Dignitas is, we got more answers from Amy Bloom's book than we did from Dignitas on some of the particulars. Okay, so back to where you were. So the best of our research, I think still accurate, was that the Dignitas was the option. And so we contacted them. They are magnificent in their information and their requirements could not be clearer. And basically what they told us, which is what they tell everybody, is we needed to submit a report from a neurologist who would verify the existence of the problem. We needed to
Mhm.
submit a report from a psychiatrist who would, this goes back to your last point, who would say that whatever Andrew's problems, he was clear enough of mind to know his own purpose and to be able to say what he wanted. And then, as we understood it from Dignitas, we would then get cleared to come to Switzerland,
Mhm.
where we would have to undergo additional medical review, which was the anxious piece of this process because that was
Yes.
sort of like the unknown box. And we didn't know what that was going to be like. And as we go through this story, I will tell you that I thought we were going to fail that test. I was wrong
Mm.
because the test is, I think, administered in a very generous fashion. But to go back to that, so I don't know what question you want next. We then apply, so we applied to them.
Yes.
We submitted written reports. I want to say that Dignitas insisted that the second report, that is on medical competence, mental competence, excuse me, be from a psychiatrist and not a psychologist.
Hmm.
That was a challenge for us because Andrew's therapist was a psychologist, not a
Oh.
psychiatrist. She had discussed this issue with him at great length, mostly privately with him, but sometimes with the two of us.
Hmm.
Um, and she was the one who could write the most thorough report on his status. And Dignitas would not accept that, I believe, because Dignitas is under ongoing and fierce review by the Swiss medical authorities and the Swiss government.
Hmm.
And the preference there, no surprise, we all know that is like, let's see the medical degree.
Got it.
But nevertheless, we applied to them. We got a psychiatrist. It was not easy. I will note this for people. It was not easy to none of the medical personnel that we happened to be working with, the Alzheimer's doctor and the Alzheimer's social worker and the
Hmm.
first psychiatrist that I contacted didn't want to be part of this.
Right.
And I think that has to do with their own ideas about dying or their own ideas about helping people with dementia live forever. I don't
Yes.
know, but this was all a challenge, finding the right
Yes.
people, sending the right information. We then got a wonderful letter from Dignitas about 3 years ago that said you've been approved. You have a provisional green light.
Hmm.
What that means is that anytime that you want to act on the plan for accompanied suicide, you need to get in touch with us. We
Hmm.
will arrange a time for you to come to Switzerland, and you will then have to update all your tests that you've sent us previously. And then you will again have to undergo review in Switzerland once
Hmm.
you're here to be certain that you qualify. And then they said in their letter, um, which I really appreciated, and I don't have the sentence with me, but they wrote in that letter, we want you to know that many people who get a provisional green light wait too long.
Mm.
And I thought that was gutsy of them to sort of say that
Yes.
because people didn't like, were questioning them and they're under review all the time. But it was very helpful for me to be able to explain to Andrew what that means is that by the time you are signaling me that you want to do this, may be a point at which you can no longer articulate it clearly enough for them to approve it.
Mm.
So that's the
Mm.
very difficult window.
Hmm.
We saw our Alzheimer's doctor and social worker regularly every few months. I wasn't clear with our friends as to how difficult, how many challenges Andrew had. But he was always the quiet partner. And so
Mm.
people would still see him socially, and we would do things with
Right.
other people, including, a hiking vacation with other people. And they would just see him as being quiet. Meanwhile, that
Mm.
was not the case. He was losing words, losing
Mm.
connections, and losing degrees of executive function. There was a point
Mm.
during those few years where I had to tell him he had to stop driving, and where his best
Yeah.
friend had to tell him he had to stop captaining the boat that
Um,
they sailed together. So it's a sad process. And if I can recommend another book, is that okay?
please, please.
So this is a book for people who are, or people who know people who are living with someone with Alzheimer's. The book is called Travelers in Unimaginable Lands
Mm.
by a woman named Dasha Kiper, Kiper. I really urge all of you who counsel families to read this book. The essential point of the book is that predominantly the caretakers for people with dementia are their partners or their children. So people who have known the patient for 30, 40, 50 years. And for them, in addition to the actual physical acts of caretaking, the emotional drain is hugely difficult because they expect, no matter what they think, their brain expects the person to respond as the person has always responded.
Yeah.
And the person is not capable of that. So you're constantly sort of caring for, living with, loving, and
Mm.
being close to someone who doesn't respond the way that person has responded their whole lives.
Right.
And that's emotionally very, very challenging. There's a like amusing twist to this story. We travel some, and about whenever it was 8 months ago, I guess we went to see the Alzheimer's doctor, and all of those meetings were basically they were every 3 months, but the wonderful doctor would ask Andrew how he was doing, and Andrew would say, I'm doing okay, but it's getting worse. And then he
Mm.
would ask me in front of Andrew how it was, and I would say
Yes.
some version of it's getting much worse. And it's
Mm.
hard for Andrew to either know that or say that. I would say it in front of him, but there are more and more things that he can't do or can't be relied on to do. We were walking back through the park after that visit, and he suddenly said to me, I think it's time to go to Sweden.
No.
And so I thought he was talking about a trip to Sweden. And I said, but we were in Sweden 2 years ago. Why do you want to go back there? And then he said, that's not what I mean. So it was just a tiny example of his
Yes.
brain function, but he meant Switzerland.
Yes.
So then we redid that. That is, we contacted Dignitas. We told them he wrote another letter, which I wrote with him, which was actually
Yes.
a beautiful process. He was talking to me about what to put in the letter. And my granddaughter, who lives with us, is an adult professional social worker, who I'll mention again later, but she was actually passing the room, and she said out loud, um, he's saying that he doesn't want to live anymore with who he now is.
Mm.
And I think that was the wording, but he seized on that wording. It was wording that he
Yeah.
couldn't have come up with himself, but it was exactly what he was feeling. So he wrote them another letter. And as I said before, that they required us to go through the same uh, two references here, one from
Hmm.
neurologist and one from a psychiatrist. The
Right.
psychiatrist issue for me was very complicated, but I ended up cleverly finding a psychiatrist who would support this,
Yes.
and having her and his psychologist, so both professionals, interview him together
Got
and
it.
then write the letter together so that it had the psychiatric stamp,
Yes.
but it also had the knowledge of the psychologist who'd been his therapist for 4 years. And we sent that to Switzerland with a date. That's what you do. And I don't know what else more you want. How you,
Wow. How'd you pick the date? And who did you tell?
we just talked a little bit about the date, and basically it was time to tell a few people and to be nervous about his capacity to convince people in Switzerland that this is what he wanted, which meant that we tried to make it relatively soon. Dignitas was entirely accommodating, but then there are, before I talk about who we told them, there's the funny moment of like, I called my travel agent and booked 2 round trips because that was the only logical thing to do, and then wrote her side and said what I didn't tell her. So I said, it's possible that Andrew may stay in Switzerland for some other work. If that happens, can we cancel his return trip? The answer was yes, but it was sort of funny. Andrew's decision was to tell his 2 brothers, who are younger than he is,
Hmm.
my 3 children,
Hmm.
with whom he is close, and his 2 best friends, and that's all.
Hmm.
And then to write a letter, which I would send after he died,
Yeah.
telling a much larger group of people.
Mhm.
I think that was, for him, that was exactly the right decision. I think it must be challenging for people who have a very different large circle of close friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
For him, that was just the right group, and we did it with some anxiety because I was nervous about. Some people thought this was a bad idea,
Yeah.
and so that might be some pushback. There was no pushback. I would say that there was appropriate anxiety and concern on the part of
Sure.
his brothers, who were losing their older brother, and
Sure.
knew the state of the mental health of their mother. So it's very hard for
Right.
them in that family.
Let me ask you another question relatedly. I mean, I know that you belong to a synagogue, have lots of rabbis in your close social circles. Were there any questions you had Jewishly as you were making the decision together? And how and when did you get your friend Joy, who happens to be a rabbi, involved that she was in Switzerland with you?
I think that's a great question. My position was that my late husband, whom I love very much, I think was occasionally somewhat impressed or moved by the fact that I really had a spiritual existence. He did not. And so so my entire role, both as a caregiver and caretaker, and then through this process, was to do what he wanted. And,
Got it.
and he didn't need or want to know what a rabbi thought. So I needed to tell rabbis what I was doing carefully,
Yeah.
but I knew what he wanted, so I knew he was going to go do it. I've known Joy for a long time, and we've been close friends. And there was a point at which I told her, and I can't remember when, I'm sorry she couldn't be on the call, but there was an early point at which I told her, the situation with Andrew is not good. And he's making a choice to explore accompanied suicide, which can only be done in Switzerland.
Hmm.
And she said then, this is probably 2 years ago,
Hmm.
well, I'll come with you.
Hmm.
My daughter is now putting in the chat that I said I was
Yeah,
going
you were going
alone,
to go alone.
but my daughter is like, anyway,
Thanks,
my
Miriam.
family wanted to be sure that somebody was coming with me, but Joy had said she would go. And what basically happened was, when you asked, like, when I put this into active planning,
Yes.
which had to be, again, a short window, because once you tell them that you're coming and you do the tests, I can't remember what their timeline is, but the tests can't be months before you go there. So it has to
Got
be,
it.
they set the timeline. So I actually contacted Joy, with whom I often had breakfast, and said,
Hmm.
can we have breakfast next week? And I think she said some days were difficult. So I said, no, I really need to have breakfast with you this week. And the
Yes.
good news about that is she's an extraordinarily person. And so we sat down to breakfast,
Yes.
and she said, when are we going to Switzerland?
Mm.
So she knew from my insistence that we meet regularly what it was. And then we had to do a little bit of arranging of that, which worked fine. But, we had to write
Right.
Dignitas and say, if someone's coming, can they be there? Is there a place for them
Yes.
to wait? And then Joy came up with, because I was so nervous about how the examinations were going to go in Switzerland.
Yes.
Joy, we came up with the plan that Andrew and I would go to Zurich for these 2 days of seeing a doctor. And as
Right.
after we saw whether it was going to go forward or not, we would let Joy know, and she would fly over then in time for the set time, which was a Friday morning. Joy then came up with the idea, which was turned out to be beautiful, of those people and perhaps some other people that I might decide to write to, telling those people what was happening
Hmm.
and asking them if they wanted to write a letter to Andrew.
Hmm.
So again, I'm just going to say, all clergy who are listening, who are doing this, please do that. And it was magnificent in our case, and there's a particular story connected to it. So I'll just kind of tell a story. So that all of those people, my kids, his brothers, his two closest friends, they all were given the opportunity to write a letter. Most of them did. And then I reached out to a small group of additional people, just like the week before we were going or
Hmm.
whatever, and said, this is happening to everybody, to the people he told, and this small group of people that I told, to everyone. I said, there's a chance we'll just both come back. We have to go there to
Right.
be examined. So that made it really hard to tell people,
Yeah.
and it made me very anxious for me. And I think it was of concern to Andrew, but I would say he was less able to focus on that. He just assumed
Yeah.
that we would work it out. It happened that one of the people that I wrote to when we were just about to go was somebody that many people on this call probably know, and that is Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who I do a lot of work
Yes.
with. It happens that because Bashert is good, that um, Sharon is married to Randy Weingarten, head
Yes.
of the teachers union. And Sharon told Randy, and literally within a minute of my having sent this email to these 20 additional people saying, I'm just telling you what I'm going through, we get this email back from Sharon that says, don't go to Switzerland until you get Randy's email. Because we were like close to getting on a plane. And Randy sat
Yes.
down, God bless her, and wrote this beautiful letter to Andrew about the difference he'd made in public education in New York.
Beautiful.
And so these letters are very powerful. And that was the one that we didn't anticipate. And it was sort of the first one that Andrew got. And what Joy and I did, fast forward a minute, was to print out all these letters
Yes.
and take them to Zurich and read them and reread them to Andrew over the 36 hours that we were there.
So tell us about what it looked like in Zurich.
Okay, so we got a hotel in Zurich. We planned the time to spend a day walking around Zurich together. And again, Amy Bloom had written about this, so I knew the structure. But the first doctor will come see you in your hotel room the night you arrive, and then the next doctor will see you the next day, two doctor visits, and then the day following is the day for the suicide. So we went back to our hotel room at about 4 o'clock, and I said to Andrew, this doctor is going to come. I don't know who this doctor is. I don't know how. I'm imagining a rigorous exam. So Andrew and
Sure.
I wrote down about 5 sentences that were his that explained what he wanted to do and why, in the hope that he was going
Yes.
to be able to be clear enough that he would meet approval. And I will tell you
Right.
that one, I was nervous, and two, I then told him to take a nap. And 5 minutes after he lay down, the phone rang, and I had no idea if this was intentional or not. But the doctor said, oh, I'm the doctor who's supposed to come by tonight, but I'm actually in your
Yes.
neighborhood. I'll be there in a half an hour. So I then said to Andrew, okay, you have to get up. You have to read through these notes again. And, I wanted to say I was just convinced that it was not going to be possible
Yeah.
because he wasn't speaking clearly enough.
Was there any part of you in that moment that you're convinced it's not going to happen, that it was because you wanted him to be alive and you weren't, 100%, I'm ready for him to die?
Oh, look, I was never ready for him to die, except I was definitely ready for him to do what he wanted. A great deal of my both professional
Sure.
training as a social worker and my work
Yes.
overseas and my work in politics has been actually trying to be sure that you listen to the people that you're trying to help and do what they want.
Yeah.
So that I'm used to that, and we had done that as a couple often.
Yes.
And I think we did that particularly around this issue. So for me, it was just like this is what Andrew wants.
Fair. Yeah.
And again, I would cite Amy Bloom as a good model, but this is what Andrew wants, and you have to be able to do it with him,
Right.
whatever you're thinking. I want to go back on rabbis. I did, after we had the plan to go to Switzerland, I did go and sit with my rabbi, who's Lauren Graybell Herman, and tell her what was happening. And with her help and Joy's help, we actually pre-planned all the stuff that you have to do, which was very helpful. Andrew and I wrote his New York Times obituary together.
Wow.
And we worked out with Lauren that assuming it worked in Switzerland, this would be the date
Hmm.
for a Shiva and a memorial service, and they were all going to be at SAJ and not in my house. So I sat Shiva in
Hmm.
the synagogue, which was much better
Hmm.
for me. It's a very comforting place. I've been a member
Yeah.
forever and
Yes.
was not looking forward to Shiva in my home, although I understand that that's a tradition. So the doctor came, and there was this great moment in which the doctor said, which I had told Andrew would be his first question, can you tell me why you are here?
Yes.
And Andrew said, the problem with teacher education in the States is, and he then explained the problem with teacher education in the States. And I thought, okay, clearly we're done for here. And the doctor said, Mr. Lachman, I have read your entire file. So I know what you just said to me is part of your lifelong professional commitment to education. But I'm here to talk to you personally, and I want to discuss your choice of accompanied suicide. And then the doctor basically asked leading questions, which
No.
was, and let me speak. And Andrew was able to say, this is my choice. I do not want to live like my mother. This is why I'm here. But it was all possible because that doctor was so wonderful. My suspicion after that experience is that Dignitas looks for doctors who will be supportive in that way. This doctor's
Hmm.
profession, don't everybody
Yes.
laugh, is he's a Botox doctor. That's what he does for a living. But he signed up to do this with Botox, and I mean with Dignitas, and he was really just wonderful. And then he said that it was he that we would see the next day. It was not a different doctor. So then I
Okay.
basically called Joy and said, get on an airplane because this
Yeah.
is going to happen. I mean, what can you say? It's like a lot of people have this experience in different ways, not necessarily accompanied suicide, but people spend time with loved ones where they know that it's the last 24 or 48 hours, and how you live it and what you do, who knows? We were able, Andrew's a sailor, and
Hmm.
Joy suggested that we take the boat cruise around Zurich.
Mm.
And the picture that you showed before, the first picture of the two of
Yes.
us talking to each other, that's on the boat.
Beautiful.
And it was a beautiful time. And we went out for meals, and at every meal we said to Andrew, can we read you some of these letters? And
Yes.
so we read them all several times. And then the actual experience, which I think people are interested in,
Yes.
clouded in a little bit of mystery because Dignitas doesn't actually appear to have any employees. I think this all has to do with their legal
Hmm.
situation. The time had been set before we left the States where it would be Friday morning at such and such a time. They give you an address to go to. So you're just
Hmm.
traveling on your own. It was me and Joy. And the taxi takes you about a half an hour outside of Zurich
Hmm.
to actually it's an industrial area. There are large industrial buildings, but there's a house in this area. I don't know if the house was there all the time and it didn't tear it down or they built it, but it looks like a little house on the prairie just sitting behind these factory buildings. You get in out of the taxi and you sort of walk into the building. I went ahead and said, like, called out, "Are we in the right place?" Because there's no one there
Right.
greeting you. And the answer is
Yes.
yes. And then we went in, and all I can tell you is that these women who I assume get paid and work full time for Dignitas, but nobody says that.
Hmm.
That they are just there to help you with the plan for the accompanied suicide, and they're like angels.
Hmm.
They are loving, they greet everybody, they tell you exactly what's going to happen. They tell you basically that you have as much time as you need.
Hmm.
So there's a medical procedure. You drink something which keeps you from throwing up, and they
Hmm.
tell you this works for 45 minutes. So we're giving this to you now. You can sit here, you can talk with us, you can talk with each other, you can go to the garden. In 45 minutes, we'll tell you to come in and take the medicine. But if you're not ready and you want a few more hours, that's fine. You just have to take the anti-nausea drug again.
Mm.
The one thing they said, which again makes me fascinated with the legal situation, is they said you don't look very much like the picture in your passport. So a local police officer will come to verify that you are who you say you are,
Hmm.
which was slightly disruptive. And it was weird because he looks exactly like the picture in his passport.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, I understand that sometimes that's true that people don't look like that, but there was no,
Right.
anyway. But indeed, this lovely guy came and said he was a police officer, spent 3 minutes saying, "Are you who you say
Oh,
you are? Is this your picture?" So I think, again, that's a legal requirement that they
sure.
do. But then other than that, it's just, we spent a little bit of time together in their garden, walking around.
Hmm.
They have a beautiful garden outside this house with a fish pond. And then they tell you, if you're ready, come inside. And they tell you exactly what's going to happen. He has to take the drug himself.
Hmm.
Um, and they say it works. And in 40 minutes, you will no longer be alive. And you
Hmm.
will, there's no, I don't know, no physical responses.
Hmm.
They ask you if you want to sit in a kind of Barca lounger or lie down on the bed. Andrew said, "I want to lie down on the bed." And being my husband, he carefully took his shoes off and put them neatly together at the foot of the bed. Um, and Joy was there. So we had Joy
Yeah.
then singing,
Mm.
which just made it all beautiful. And, no one no one looks to go through something like this, but I felt secure in my own faith and spiritual commitment, but mostly I felt like this is exactly what he wants. He is extremely brave to make this choice, and my job is to support him in every way that I can. And given that he was in some areas limited, there was a lot that I needed to do to support him, and I did what I could.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
proud of having been able to do it, as hard as it was.
Ruth, it's a gift that you're willing to share so openly your story with all of us today.
So I
One more
see,
thing I want to make sure you talk about is a letter from your grandchild.
right. So yes, so I'd like to read that to people because
Please.
everybody, as I say, has their own ways of dealing with things like this. This is my adult granddaughter who's lived with us for about 10 years and now lives with her husband and her children. She was probably the first person who knew about these plans because she lives here. So she knew that we were
Right.
thinking about this. And she knew when we decided to do it. She came into the room and said to Andrew, I know Joy and Ruth are asking people to write letters, but I'm not going to write letters. I'm just going to tell you now that it's very sad, but I think you're doing the right thing. But then, just before I we left, she wrote something on a card, on a 3x5 card, and gave it to me. And so I folded it and put it in my purse. And I'll tell you what happened about that in a minute, because then a month after we came back, her name is Francesca, told me that she's regularly a participant in something called the Moth, which people probably know about. It's a storytelling
Storytelling. Yeah.
system. She told me that the Moth in New York had invited her to come to a moth, super moth, and she told me, "I'm going to write about Andrew,
Mm.
and I'm not going to show it to you before I go." And so the story is she went to the Moth, she did this story, she won first prize, and then she was
Nothing like a proud grandma.
and then she shared with us what she wrote, and I'm reading it to everyone because it's a beautiful personal story, but also, as I said, because she captures, which I had not done in writing, some of what it was like to live with somebody who has dementia, which I think is
Mhm.
relevant to all the people on this call. So here's her moth story. Maybe somebody's going to write the book on how to be your best self every day when you're living with someone with Alzheimer's, but it certainly won't be me. My family and I lived alongside the intact version of my grandfather Andrew for many years before we saw him become a man who couldn't bear to live with himself. It was gradual until it wasn't. Last fall, just as I had started maternity leave with my second child, the deterioration sped up. The ground under his mind crumbled, and when both of us at home, I felt like I fell into the Alzheimer's sinkhole too. I'd see him on the couch for hours at a time, staring 3 feet into nowhere, trying to remember what it felt like to remember anything at all. And the truth is that most of the time I walked right by because I couldn't constantly dive into that pain. At any given moment, I didn't want to help figure out how to make things better. I just didn't want it to be happening at all. Because yes, it's sad, deeply sad to live with someone in that place, but it's also frustrating and annoying, strange and distracting. I had shit that I had to do and that I had to keep going. I had to pack lunches and get my 5-year-old to brush his teeth, change diapers, and be my own person and pay attention to my marriage. So I did get flustered when I'd find the Clorox in the freezer and spinach in the dishwasher. And I was resentful when I'd eat off dirty plates because he insisted on continuing to be the one to wash them, even though he couldn't really, could he? Some of it just felt too hard. Stumbling to make a bottle at 3 in the morning and finding him standing, keys in hand, dressed in a button-up shirt but no pants, ready to leave. Having to let the baby cry longer so I could convince him to go back to his room. But of course, he hated all that more than anyone else. A few years ago, Andrew and my grandmother had looked into assisted dying in Switzerland. For a while, she would ask him every week, "Is this what you want? Because if it is, we have to put it in motion. There will come a point where you won't be able to express yourself well enough to convince the right people to let you do it." It had gone to the back burner until one day this spring he told her, surprisingly clearly, that it was time. The window of Andrew being Andrew was closing, and he wanted to slip through. He wanted to die as himself, and she was willing to help him. And again, because we lived together, I knew that that was going down long before anyone else. It wasn't until 2 weeks before they left for Switzerland that my grandmother told a whole universe of people, inviting them to email her anything that they wanted to say to him. And I'm not proud of it, but I hated that. I was furious that all these other people would now say goodbye in writing, still from a safe distance. They wouldn't have to confront the fact that he couldn't even read anymore. Where were all those people and their pretty words on those endless, crushing, silent afternoons? So when I got that email too, sitting 20 feet away in the next room, I wasn't having it. I walked out and said, "No, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to email you how I feel about you. I'm right here and you know how I feel. I'm sad, but this is what you want, and I'm glad you'll be able to get that." Still, I did want to contribute. So I found a card and a pen and wrote a note. I handed it to my grandmother and watched her tuck it in her purse. They did go to Switzerland. Andrew did choose, and on June 6th, he did die. When she came back, my grandmother thanked everybody who had written those emails. She had printed them out and spent his last days reading them to him. She said he'd appreciated every one. But once, it was just the two of us alone, she told me that in his last hour, she asked him if there was anything he wanted with him, anything he wanted on his person when he went to lay down on the bed. From the pile of letters on the table, he pointed out my note and said, "I'll take that." He slipped it into his shirt pocket, made himself comfortable, and let go of life. The message I had written was just 14 words long. "You are brave. You are loved. You made a difference. You will be missed." I don't know how much I got right and how much I got wrong, but of all the words I ever said and never said, I can live with those.
Ruth.
So that's the storytelling that I can't do, but that is what it was like to live with him. It was very, very hard much of the time because you knew that he was not able to focus on what was going on. And it was beautiful some of the rest of the time. We were able to travel in the last year, which I would say was not always easy, but we were able to
Yeah.
travel and be together. And Dignitas made this the best possible experience. And it's very sad that, to the best of my knowledge, it's still relatively unavailable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as people
It's
are
true.
noting in the chat, that it's changing in some places, and that's good. But this is, in my judgment, and in my judgment, Jewishly, this is a journey that people should be able to make for themselves and be supportive of. And it's one way of choosing end of life. I will tell one other notion that Joy had researched the existence of a synagogue in Zurich. It was a Reform synagogue that she found. She wrote the rabbi and said, "I'm a rabbi. I'm going to be in Switzerland. I'm coming to services Friday night." That was the night after of this. The suicide
Yes.
was on Friday. So I had accompanied him. Joy had accompanied us. We got back into Zurich. We went to the synagogue. The rabbi came over before the service started, friendly, and of course said to Joy, "So are you a tourist?" And Joy said, "I'm here with my friend who who is with who," and she and her husband went to Dignitas this morning. That's what Joy
Mm.
said. And the rabbi said, "Oh, so it's an exit visit,"
Wow.
which I thought was a great rabbinic word. So it was
Yes.
our exit visit to Switzerland.
Exit. Yeah. Friends, this is what we need to be doing. We need to be talking, to sharing our stories about life, about how Ruth and Andrew chose life and what their choices looked like. Ruth, it really is a blessing to be in your orbit, to learn from you, to learn with you, and to continue to learn as we walk the next steps in life, each of us. This is a series of conversations. Today, starting with one family's story. We've started in one place. Next time, we'll be looking at Jewish law, starting with an Orthodox rabbi, and I'll be sharing sources from the other movements as well. And then we'll wrap up in March with a community conversation about how we make sense of all of this. As you well know, traditional Jewish sources are not in favor of what is now called medical aid in dying. And yet, there are rabbis who have written opinions that allow for it in certain situations, especially among the liberal movements. We will look at all of those sources together.
And just
Please.
note, my one of my branch of my family is modern Orthodox, and my
Yes.
16-year-old grandson in that family asked about Jewish law. And
Yes.
the rabbi that he spoke to said to him, this is an example of changes in the world that people didn't anticipate, and gave him a few citations of other things where minhag changed because the circumstances of how people
Yes.
lived and died changed, and that satisfied
Yes.
him. I don't know that that's halakhic, but it was very good for him to have that rabbi.
Very helpful. If you are in need of support, friends, please reach out to us. hello@shomercollective.org. Happy to set up a one-on-one time to talk and provide more information and referrals if you are in need of support. And we exist because of the generosity of our supporters. If you are able to support us, if you want to express your gratitude with a donation, you can do so through the link, helping us and more of us to talk about life and death Jewishly. All right, friends, that brings our formal program to a close. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.